Hello and welcome to this week's podcast from ITV News, the Royal Rota. We try and be with you every week, and we have had this week, I have to say, haven't we, Lizzie, an ecstatic time in York.
It's been excellent.
And we just cracked on with the job.
Just cracked on.
As did the King. You might know why we're talking, making some references to eggs, and you might know that in York, on a visit there with the King and Queen Consort this week, 4 of the oval objects came in his direction. Well, we counted 4. There could have been more.
We counted 4.
Yep.
All missed the King, who just got on with the job, didn't he?
What did he do? What did he do with his feet?
He recalibrated his feet.
Exactly. Now, we're lucky enough this week to have Hugo Vickers with us, a biographer, a author, a royal historian. What aren't you, Hugo?
Well, I'm definitely not going to make any bad yolks.
This is going to be such a cracking episode. I'm so excited. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. The reason Hugo is here is because he has had the pleasure or displeasure, you may inform us in due course, to watch all episodes of Season 5 or Series 5 of The Crown. And you had a very interesting article in the Times this week where you wrote about what was fact and what was fiction. And if I were to summarise your views, it would be something along the lines of most of it's fiction.
Very negative, I'm afraid, about this series. I used to actually quite enjoy some of the early ones because as they had such a lavish production and they boasted that they'd got all their facts right and they'd got all their uniforms right, it was very easy to pick holes in it, and I thought that would be quite annoying for them. But this time I didn't actually enjoy watching the episodes at all. What I did was to examine each one forensically first.
Yes.
And so I saw most of the episodes, unfortunately, twice.
Maybe that's why you didn't enjoy it, because you're sitting there trying to forensically examine them, and actually isn't the job of the Crown is actually just to entertain people and say, do you know what, here is a kind of drama loosely based on things that happened in the past. Go and enjoy it.
I wish that was true. I think it's got a very strong Republican agenda, frankly. I think the idea is to make them all look ridiculous.
You mean Peter Morgan?
Peter Morgan. Yeah. I think in the early days, I thought, Claire Foy, I thought did a very good job as the Queen. So I thought, well, they're building the Queen up and then they're going to make everybody else look ridiculous. The idea being, fine with the Queen, but after that, let's get rid of them, which I think is slightly what their subtext is. And so then they had Olivia Colman, who I thought, if you didn't know anything about the Queen, you'd rather dislike the Queen after seeing her performance, because she's got a very cheeky smile. She was always looking incredibly glum. And as for Imelda Staunton, I'm afraid I think I used the phrase, it's not very subtle, more Coronation Street than Coronation.
More Coronation Street than Coronation. No, you've watched all, how many episodes are there?
50. Well, they're 50 all in.
All in, 50. But in
season 5, 10. You've watched all.
I've watched all of them. Yes.
You've watched all 10. Oh, actually, and I've not quite managed all 10, so therefore you're much more informed than I am. But do you want to just finish the conversation off about York? I mean, what was your view? We were there. I thought the King kind of handled it as you'd expect him to, very much like ignore what happened, step over the eggs, carry on. And then he went on to do a walkabout afterwards as well. We saw his protection officers looking a little concerned, and they crowded around him to try and shield him in case any more missiles were incoming. But what did you make of it, Hugo?
Well, I couldn't work out why. Do we know why they were throwing the eggs? What was their particular protest?
Well, we hear the Rebecca English, who's the Daily Mail's correspondent, said she heard the protesters shout about Britain being built on the backs of slaves or something like that. And of course, there will be a police investigation. We shouldn't sort of prejudice that in any way. And the man that they arrested, a 23-year-old, has been bailed pending further inquiries. But there was a protest. And actually, what I saw on the other side of the road that a lot of people didn't pick up on was a sign written saying "Not my king."
So it's in your report.
Yes. So quite clear that there were at least 2 people who weren't approving of his visit. But then, should we be surprised? It wouldn't have happened with the Queen.
No, there were, I think, a couple of incidents. Once at, Stirling University some years ago when an egg was thrown by some student. And I think in Dresden when there was, because of all the business of the bombing at the end of the war, I think so. But no, the Queen was always treated with great respect. And it's disappointing. You remember, because you will have seen how warmly he was received in the Mall in the days just after the Queen died. And it's a bit depressing if they're starting to do this.
Well, you say depressing, Lizzie, but, it was just, if it were just 2 people, and there were plenty of crowds who then then, as we saw, didn't we, yesterday, Liz? You started shouting, "God save the Queen," and "Shame on you" to the protester.
Yeah, I think everywhere we have been since the King took the throne, the crowds have been really incredible. There's been an amazing turnout, and that was the same in York. There was a real sense of excitement in York for their visit. People were really looking forward to it, and the crowd was unhappy and quite hostile when this happened, and started reacting by cheering and shouting, "God save the King," and I think that people were disappointed that York was being talked about because of the egg incident rather than the moment of the King's visit.
Actually, interestingly, because I spotted, we walked past, this happened at, it's called Micklegate Bar, which is where the sovereign is traditionally welcomed into the city of York. The Queen last did it, I think, in 2012. But I looked at, as we walked through Micklegate Bar earlier in the day, before actually the King and the eggs arrived, I was struck by how it said, this is the official sign outside, it says, "Micklegate Bar is the most important of York's gateways and has acted as the focus for various important events." Okay, it goes on to list the important events. 1, such as greeting a monarch on a royal visit. That's what happened. And important event number 2, to display the severed heads of traitors.
Heavens.
I mean, these are the 2 important jobs of Micklegate Bar. Now, clearly yesterday it did one of those jobs, which is welcome the monarch to York. We didn't notice any severed heads of traitors while we were there, did we?
We did not.
No, so thankfully that was the case. But then, so I mean, we were talking again about whether or not this would have happened to the Queen. And I think you were saying, Hugo, probably not. But
definitely not.
But as we just said, the majority, 99% of the people there, wanted to welcome the King to York and the Queen Consort.
Well, it seemed like that, didn't it? I mean, there was. I watched your report, and there were lots of sort of enthusiastic cries in his direction, of support, and as you say, "God save the King," and things like that. And of course, it is the important role of a new monarch to get around Britain and be seen as much as possible in these different cities, and York is a very important one.
And he's really wanted to do that. He has really wanted to get out there and meet as many people, and we've seen him on walkabouts wherever he goes. He does try and go over to the crowds and meet them, and he did that even after the egg incident yesterday.
The difference, we say, that the Queen would come along, she would do a walkabout, but she would walk past the crowd, smile at them, maybe chat to one or two, but the King goes right in there, handshaking, right up to them. The Queen Consort does as well, just as he did when he was Prince of Wales. He's doing the same as King, and that's created a bit of a extra security risk, I suppose, for his police protection officers.
I imagine it has, but of course they've always felt that they need to be out and to be seen and to be doing things, and they take these sort of incidents as part of a sort of occupational hazard, which is very occasional, and indeed more seriously, of course, if there's ever an assassination attempt or something. I mean, do you remember the time in the Mall in 1981 when blanks were fired at the Queen? And if ever you want to know what the calibre of our late monarch was, the way she controlled her horse and went right through that parade as if nothing had happened, brilliant.
Yeah, indeed. Talking of our late monarch, what did you think of the statue of the late monarch on the side of the wonderful cathedral that is York Minster?
It's probably going to sound rather too specific, but it was very interesting where they portrayed her in garter robes, and at some point the Queen had her star changed on her garter robes, and so there was a little sort of circle around it, and I noticed that the sculptor had actually put that circle in. I think
I love your attention to detail. It's just I looked at this statue and thought, we saw the orb and the sceptre, and there was our late Queen.
That's nice,
and then you bring Hugo in because you get that level of detail, don't you, about the garter star.
Well, detail is what we're going to be talking about, isn't it?
Well, indeed, and we'll get to that. But I mean, listen, I thought, in terms of this was a statue which was commissioned to celebrate her Platinum Jubilee. But as the King said in that speech we couldn't hear because they, for some reason, couldn't work out the sound, he said that it was unveiled as in memory of his late mother.
In memory and reflecting on her service and contribution to public life.
Yeah, and we spoke to the Archbishop of York when we were outside York Minster yesterday, and this is what he said about having this new statue of the late Queen Elizabeth II on the side of the beautiful building.
The statue was going to be a way of honouring the Platinum Jubilee, but of course with Her late Majesty the Queen's death it's now got an added poignancy and meaning, and it stands here to celebrate the whole of her life, the longest reign in British history, and all that she meant not just for York, but for the nation and indeed for the world.
Right then, so shall we talk about the reason why we've invited Hugo onto the podcast this week? So, The Crown. Now, I think I spoke to you recently. I said, well, where do you think the sort of inaccuracy started? And you said, Season 1, Episode 1.
True. Most people, of course, forget because they didn't know what was going on quite so much in those days. And so people enjoyed it more for a drama. I think the one good thing The Crown did in its early days was to remind people that the Queen and Prince Philip had been very young when they took over.
Yes.
And that was, I think, worth doing.
Yeah, just Claire Foy being Claire Foy. Just reminded everyone that we had this 25-year-old, beautiful, young, glamorous Queen in 1952.
And I've always thought that Claire Foy did a very good job, actually, as the Queen. She got her sense of theatrical timing very well. She was very good. But no, unfortunately, right from the start, all the storylines were mixed up. They have several things that they do. One is that they treat the crown as the most important thing, and anyone who steps in its way gets crushed underfoot. Therefore, the Duke of Windsor becomes a Shakespearean hero. Princess Margaret is a victim. Prince Philip is a little bit of a victim. Princess Diana, of course, is a complete victim. The other thing they do is to take two things which sort of happened and clash them against each other to make something that didn't happen. Witness, for example, yes, the Queen entertained Mrs. Kennedy, Jack and Jacqueline Kennedy for dinner, and yes, she went to Ghana, but she didn't go to Ghana despite Mrs. Kennedy. She went to Ghana to keep Ghana in the Commonwealth. This is very well known.
Yeah, it's the changing of the timeline, isn't it? So as we just said, any conversation that any member of the royal family have had in private is private, and Peter Morgan and whoever else writes the episodes have no idea what conversations went on. But you would like to think that a lot of the events, the speeches, the launch of Britannia, for example, would all be factual. But I mean, as you were saying from the very beginning, from the beginning of episode 1, season 5, the Queen never made a speech when she launched the Royal Yacht Britannia, and yet it was written to be as if this new ship was somehow reflecting on her reign.
Yes, exactly. It's a typical sort of device that they would use. There are two things which they did which are really, really bad in the whole series of The Crown. One is blaming Prince Philip for the death of his sister. They cook up an episode where he punches a boy at Gordonstoun.
That's right, and therefore she then dies in that.
His father says, it's because of you, boy, we're burying my favourite child, whereas the real Prince Andrew, Prince Philip's father, went to collect him from Gordonstoun, took him over to the funeral. They went over together. The other thing, of course, which, if you say, well, we're learning about history, what about Mrs. Thatcher? That episode where, Geoffrey Howe gets out of bed, he goes to the House of Commons, makes his speech, she looks depressed, she talks to ministers, Dennis tells her the game's up, and then guess what? Apparently she's going to go to see the Queen to ask for a dissolution of Parliament. Well, she never did that.
Of course, yeah.
Why do they have to do that?
Yeah.
It makes and that's just one example.
Well, talking of Prime Ministers, and Lizzie, wouldn't you explain the whole thing about, John Major and, the claim in The Crown that the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, tried to cook up a campaign with the then Prime Minister to get his mother to abdicate, which we all know she would never do.
So this is episode 1 of season 5. This happens straight away. Season 5 covers off from the starts in 91 and finishes in the summer of 97. So a difficult period for the royal family.
Yes, one of those years was the Annus Horribilis. We'll talk about that speech as well in a minute.
Get to, but yes, the first episode opens, doesn't it, Hugo, with that meeting between the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, and John Major, and he is suggesting to him that perhaps they should get the Queen to step aside and let him take over because of what they call Queen Victoria syndrome.
Yes, well, they even cook up a headline sort of from the Sunday Times of the 11th of August 1991. Well,
this is the Sunday Times are trying to hide from the Queen, isn't it?
Yes, and I looked up that particular edition of the Sunday Times, and it's absolutely nothing about a survey at all, or a poll. And in fact, if you look at what was going on at the time, Prince Charles wasn't particularly popular. He was annoying the architects. He was being criticised for all sorts of things,
and blamed for the breakdown of their marriage as well.
Yes, that was all coming up. But of course, also the press. Quite interesting. I'm rather well documented on. Well, actually, the whole reign, but that particular part, there's a lot about James Hewitt. He doesn't even get a mention in this, Diana's lover, because, of course, this is very much the gospel according to Diana, not according to Prince Charles.
Well, I think to anyone who knows anything about the then Prince Charles and our current king, he would respect the rules and the institution, and he knows full well that his mother in 1947 said, "I shall reign from my life be long or short, I shall be devoted to your service."
Well, it was John Major that came out and described it as a barrel load of nonsense, didn't he?
Well, he did, and so it proved to be. And you know, it's absolutely outrageous that one of the things that Peter Morgan seemed to think that he can do is, because we haven't been told what people talk about, that you can make it up. Well, sometimes I think really good fiction can help you to understand something. It can bring the story on, and it can sort of shed light on it, but not if you're making up nonsense like that.
The thing is with The Crown is that Netflix make clear that it is a fictional drama based on historical events. But that is, they firstly don't have a disclaimer, which lots of people have called for. But when it's based on historical events, when you're looking at, when you're watching it,
you want historical events to be true.
Yes.
There are so they play characters that they're based on real people, so you look at them and they're believable. I mean, Elizabeth Debicki as Princess Diana. I mean the likeness is absolutely astonishing. So you're believing that these are people that the real people, and then you're looking at some events that we know did happen. You know, the breakdown of the marriage of the Waleses.
But they kind of take a side on that, don't they? I mean, it's quite clear who the Crown blames for the.
But it's because it's so based on history and events that are so recognisable to us. You then are led to think, oh, did the other things in it actually happen? Let's
talk about one historical event, which was the speech on the 24th of November 1992. If you go on the Buckingham Palace website, royal.uk, it is actually written on there as a speech by the Queen on the 40th anniversary of her succession, open brackets, Annus Horribilis speech, close brackets. Everyone knows that famous line, 1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. That line was in The Crown. But then there were plenty of other lines, and I went through the speech going, hold on a minute, I can't find that anywhere, and couldn't see it because they'd rewritten it.
But because you know the line Annus Horribilis, that's what's etched. That's what's etched in our minds.
So you therefore think everything else
you hear
said,
it, and then you think, oh, the rest of the speech must therefore be based on the truth.
Yes,
it's not, is it, Hugo?
There's a line she says in The Crown, my family have quite literally been my sun and water, she says. Nope, nowhere in the speech. Couldn't find it because it wasn't there, and she didn't say it.
And also, you know, they've changed the tone of it, because actually what the Queen was saying in that speech, which was just after all the marriages had broken down,
and the fire
had been literally 4 days before.
And that's why she had that hoarse voice.
And that's why she had the hoarse voice, and she was basically saying, you know, that she understood that monarchy could be criticised, but it could be done, you know, a little bit more gently than was being done at the time.
Well, I can quote it to you. No institution, city, because she was in the City of London, wasn't she? Monarchy or whatever, should expect to be free from the scrutiny of those who give it their loyalty and support. That was what she actually said.
Yes.
And then if you look into The Crown, it's like, if we can't admit the error of our ways, what hope for reconciliation can there be?
So you see, it's turning it into a whinge, you see, instead of a rather elegant and graceful speech.
Yes, yeah.
Which is disgraceful.
And again, this is where if you are going to use historical facts like the Annus Horribilis speech, then you do, as a viewer, expect the programme to stick to the speech.
You do, and you see, the awful truth is that these things, these visual images, which are so powerful in The Crown, get into people's heads and people believe it to be true. For example, when there's this whole scene where they remove a whole lot of stuff from the Duke of Windsor's house and put it in a van, sending it back to England for the Queen. Well, that never happened, because I mean, I was at the sale in New York. I can give you the lot numbers of the items that were being sold. But when you see that, you can forgive people for believing that that's what actually happened, because they show it. It's really, I don't know, it's just so annoying.
Now, on the house, one of your questions here, did Mohammed Fayed hire the Duke of Windsor's valet to learn about how to be an English gentleman? And did he then subsequently buy what he called Villa Windsor in The Crown? Is that true? Is any of that true?
He did take on Sidney Johnson. He was rather keen on taking on people who had rather grand jobs. And so, yes, he did take Sidney Johnson on. I don't think Sidney Johnson was teaching him how to be an English gentleman. And he certainly, even if he taught him how to tie a tie, he certainly would have been advising him about what books to read or how to shoot or any of that nonsense. But it is actually true that Sidney did steer Fayed towards the house in the Bois de Boulogne after the Duchess of Windsor died. He said, you find this very interesting. And I mean, I know this because I was there. I met Sidney at the house. I mean, I was there quite a lot because I wrote various articles and indeed a book about the restoration. And so that part is true. but once again, all exaggerated, and you see Fayed thinking. I mean, in real life, Fayed thought that by buying or taking on the lease of the house in Paris, he would sort of, as it were, please the establishment, and if he gave some things to the Queen, but she didn't actually want anything, that he might even get a knighthood. I think actually at one point in real life, Fayed was saying, well, you can have these things, but what do I get in return? We don't get any of that in the Crown, of course. And then everything was sold in New York, and the Queen actually, happened to know, preferred that the sale should be in New York rather than in London, just because it was a little bit further away.
Now, the Crown had its official premiere this week, big red carpet event. I take it, Hugo, you didn't go from everything that you just said.
I was not invited.
You were not invited to be on the red carpet. What I thought was interesting was that, we'll play you a clip from it actually, Dominic West, who plays Prince Charles in Series 5, kind of says, well, he's got a lot of respect for the then Prince, the current monarch, and because of the Prince's Trust and other things, and he didn't want to do anything that would put that reputation at risk. Have a listen.
Well, I think it's all going pretty well. I mean, what's interesting about season 5 and that period was, and we have it a lot in the show, of people questioning whether he would be king, whether he should be king, or whether he wanted to be king, and none of that has been raised since he became king. And I think I really do feel there's a man who's suffered scrutiny all his life and criticism all his life, I think has sort of become, I think his people feel very affectionate towards him now. I think the endless criticism he got seems to have gone, and I think we all feel rather fond of him and proud of him and in slight awe of him. I do anyway.
So what do we make of that? The actor who played Prince Charles says, I didn't want to do anything to damage his reputation.
Well, it's keeping his options open. Of course, he didn't particularly damage him. I suppose he didn't. No, he did. Of course, he did, because there were certain lines that he had to read out, like talking about saying how that they would, the Queen ought to be in jail as a bad mother and stuff like that, which he would never have done. But he is apparently some sort of ambassador for the Prince's Trust, and I guess he wanted to keep in with him. But yeah, I mean,
after taking Netflix's shilling,
yeah,
of course. So.
Exactly. That's the trouble with all of them. I thought that Jonathan Pryce was very effective as Prince Philip. He got his mannerisms well.
And as you just said, Elizabeth Debicki was just brilliant as Princess Diana.
Really, I thought an absolutely standout performance from her in terms of likeness. I mean,
and you've already said Imelda Staunton as the Queen.
I didn't like
Coronation Street rather than Coronation.
Yes, I didn't like that performance.
Who else is in there? And I thought Prince Philip, was actually very, very good. What do we think of the Princess Margaret and Prince Andrew characters? I thought Prince Andrew was quite accurate. He
it's
looked
only
like
a very small part. He looked quite like him. But I thought Leslie Manville was awful as Princess Margaret. I mean, she was looked very bitter, very sort of pinched, and sort of. I didn't like that performance at all. And as for the lady playing the Queen Mother, I mean, for heaven's sake.
You didn't think it was a good likeness at all? No, well, not from what I remember of the Queen Mother. But then there were, the Queen Mother was more and more aged, of course, up until her death in 2002. But
they have this very thin, spindly actress.
Yes, and she wasn't. She was much more kind of sort of. How would you describe it? Grandmotherly.
Well, the trouble is that actually they've obviously hated the Queen Mother from the start, because ever since the beginning of the production, they've always had annoying actresses playing.
But she's always been also the person to put her foot down about certainly changes, or doesn't want to modernise, doesn't want to change anything. That's been the Queen Mother's character throughout, isn't it? And also the other thing that struck me is we all know that the Queen's favourite place was she loved Balmoral, but she loved Windsor.
Windsor, yes.
And actually there was that exchange with her doctor at the beginning, wasn't it? Where they said, "Oh, my favourite place is Balmoral, but then second favourite is Britannia."
That was extraordinary.
Yeah.
Why did that happen? Well, because they wanted to talk about Britannia. Yeah. That's why they did it.
In the scene actually at Windsor in this season of The Crown, they have the fire, don't they? And the Queen is in the wreckage, and she's joined by Prince Philip to comfort her, but he wasn't even in the country at the time, was he?
No, he wasn't, and nobody would have allowed anyone near that wreckage like that at that particular
to
point.
walk over all the ruins.
Exactly,
exactly.
with beams falling at any minute. I mean, come on. Or the other one.
Just literally like pulling out the
anyway,
the
of course,
picture frames.
they showed real footage again of the fire. That was part of it. Your old friend Sir Trevor MacDonald appears in the monarchy debate, the real Sir Trevor, with people like Stephen Haysler and
the monarchy
others.
debate that they show, that was a real programme, wasn't it?
Yes.
But they also show Princess Diana lying on the sofa at home, voting repeatedly, again and again, no, we shouldn't have a monarchy, no, we shouldn't have, and she's dancing around the room, hitting redial. I mean, how could we ever know?
When voting was done by redialing, wasn't it, rather
but
than
how could you ever
on
know
an app?
About, I mean, that's presumably
but actually,
false.
Didn't we think that, I mean, we discussed at length the whole issues around Martin Bashir and Panorama and how it came about and everything that he did and all the bank statements and everything else. We won't go over that ground. But didn't you think the way in which they recreated that room and the way in which Elizabeth Debicki, just portrayed Diana in that interview, it was amazing, wasn't it?
I mean, the likeness again there when you watched her, Debicki giving that performance of the Panorama interview, the likeness there was extraordinary. But I was there when Prince William said he never wanted that to be shown again because of the circumstances that interview was got under. And yet here we are producing we're watching
two episodes based on the
Bashir interview and seeing clips from it replayed during the episodes.
Well, they don't hesitate ever to
acted. Not replayed.
But they don't hesitate
to
double in people's grief. I thought it was absolutely atrocious that they should cast Leonora Knatchbull, that little girl who died aged 5. I mean, why bring that up? I mean, why? It must be incredibly distressing to her family.
Yes, exactly. I mean, she died of cancer, wasn't it, or blood cancer?
Yes.
And they look at the friendship, don't they, between the Duke of Edinburgh and Penny Knatchbull. Quite some length over a couple of episodes. What did you think of that?
Well, I didn't like it, of course. To be honest, I think they don't know the nature of these friendships. All I can tell you is that I've been very lucky sometimes to be at Windsor. I've been at the Royal Chapel once on a Sunday. You see the Queen and Lady Rumsey and Prince Philip all there happily together. So,
do you remember seeing Lady Rumsey with Prince Philip when they had that Sandringham summit? Trying to work out what to do with Harry and Meghan. And one of our cameras, you remember, we caught a sight of. It's almost like Prince Philip was not in the room, like made his views known, and then went out with Lady Rumsey, didn't he, at Sandringham? So it was a friendship, that lasted
they did a lot of
the years.
They certainly did driving. Carriage driving together a lot. I mean, that was, very much so, and a lot at Sandringham with the Queen inviting both of them there, basically.
And the Crown shows, doesn't it, the Prince Philip having a conversation with the Queen where he's asking her to befriend Lady Rumsey to dispel any potential rumours, and then the Queen invites her to join her in the car to go to Christmas Day at Sandringham. Did any of that happen?
Well, all I can tell you is that as Penelope Eastwood, she was originally a friend of Prince Charles, or so people thought. I think she was once used as a decoy to leave Balmoral around about 1978 before she married Lord Ramsay. And I think this was to hide another girlfriend. But I remember the photographs. And so basically they will have known her right since those days. And the entire royal family attended the wedding of Lord Ramsay to her in 1979, which was just after Lord Mountbatten had been assassinated. So they knew her very well. I mean, this is.
Did she ride in the car on Christmas Day?
Don't know about Christmas Day. She might. No, not on Christmas Day. No, of course not. No, because she would have been with her own family on Christmas Day. But I mean, she may well have ridden in a car on other occasions. Why not?
You know what? Talking of Christmas Day, we should probably look ahead at some point, shouldn't we, to the King's Christmas broadcast this year, because we've had plenty of Queen's Christmas broadcasts. The first one televised 1956, 57 at Sandringham, which the Queen did live. It just struck me that this year it's going to feel and look very different, isn't it?
It is. I wonder whether he'll change the format at all. You know, he might. Because obviously the first person who did it was George V.
Yes, on radio.
On radio.
Yep.
And George VI, who had always the problem with his stammer. That was always a everybody was.
And I was struck when I learned that the Queen did it live for the first time.
Yes.
Actually did it live from the whatever it was drawing room at Sandringham. So
well, of course, in those days, I think that's what you did.
Yeah.
I mean, it's extraordinary.
And now as we know, the Queen tends to record it a couple of weeks before Christmas, and then it's obviously broadcast on Christmas Day and all the rest of it. So yeah, and again, another address that the King's going to have to get right, just as he got the speech, the address right. He met the moment on the day after her death.
He certainly did.
That was Friday evening,
yes.
September the 9th. Another big job for him this Christmas.
I thought that was an amazing address that he did, because he was really looking out, and he was doing that extraordinary thing of sort of saying how he knew how much we all minded.
Yes.
And in fact, of course, fundamentally at the end of the day it was him. Whereas he didn't always used to do that. I mean, when the Queen Mother died, it was like, what am I going to do now? I've lost my best ally.
But I just think this Christmas they need that same level of quality in the speech. And
I'm sure they'll get it.
I'm sure they're working on it right now.
But it also, I mean, the Queen's last year was quite reflective on the loss of Prince Philip, and I suspect the King's this year will be very reflective on the loss of his mother and the Queen.
It's bound to be, isn't it? Because it's been a sort of roller coaster of a year with the Jubilee and all those celebrations, and then, the Queen's death in September and those long days of mourning. And I guess he might also look forward to his coronation as well. I
still cannot believe we had the Jubilee in June, this
year.
Like
another world,
and actually, when we going back to where we started this conversation about the statue of the Queen on the side of York Minster, that was for her. I said it again. I said it earlier in this podcast. For her Platinum Jubilee, and those two seismic events we've had both this year. The historic Platinum Jubilee, never had one of them before. Accession Day on February the 6th, when she had said, "Where's my intent that Camilla will be Queen Consort to King Charles," and it's all happened. I mean, I can't still struggle to comprehend all that.
She was very generous, wasn't she? She tied up a lot of loose ends for the new king. While she could, because by her asking us to accept Camilla as Queen, we all accepted it absolutely without a backward glance, because after 70 years of devoted service, if she asked one small favour, yes, of course.
Yes, of course we do it.
Had that not been done, and had he announced that on the Friday, I think that might have been quite difficult.
I agree. I completely agree. And has anyone actually said, why is she Queen Consort? Really? Is that debate actually been had? No, it's just been accepted.
And I suspect over time, Consort will be dropped.
And I do too. Maybe from the coronation. Talking of coronation, if you want a thoroughly good read, Hugo Vickers is the author of the book called Coronation. Also, he's written The Crown Dissected, seasons 1, 2, 3 and 4. You can get in print, and 5 might be an ebook. Is that right? The Crown Dissected by Hugo Vickers.
Get them all as an ebook. It costs about £2 or £3 or something on Amazon.
Yep.
Get all 50 episodes. And
I mean, how damaging do you think the latest season of The Crown is to the King and Queen Consort particularly? I mean, they've come a long way since the episodes that we've been watching and the time that we've been watching, where the breakdown of Charles's marriage and the introduction of Camilla Parker Bowles at the time, that's reminding everybody of that time.
In a way, wasn't that all priced in? Everyone knew they had extramarital affairs,
as
well as we should point out Diana had them as well.
But it's bringing it.
Yeah,
it's bringing it up again.
I think
How
it's
damaging
a great pity, because I think it's a shame, because I think there'll be quite a lot of much younger people, for example, who actually won't know about all that and will be learning it all for the first time. And of course, if you're a historian, you can read it. I mean, there are plenty of books. It's all well covered. But I think it's a shame, and I think at the timing, actually, of this releasing this series within 2 months of the Queen's death, and after what this nation and indeed the whole world went through, I think is unattractive, to say the least.
And the season ends in the summer of '97. We're about to see Diana go away with the Fayeds, which means that season 6 is going to start in a very difficult
August the 31st,
place.
1997.
And as we get nearer to the present day, as they have to deal with those difficult times, that's going to be.
I don't know how far they're going to go, but I think they've always said they would end round about the time of the Jubilee, although they seem to pick up a hint.
Which Jubilee?
Well, the 2002 Jubilee.
2002,
but equally, I think I saw sort of rather sinister hints that they might go further. I mean, I don't know whether they can resist it, I mean, it's just they must be making so much money picking away at these people's lives. I don't know. Not for me.
We shall see. Before we wrap up, we should probably look ahead to Sunday's remembrance service, because whilst the King, as he is now, has previously laid a wreath on behalf of his mother and has done since 2017, this is the first time he's going to be just laying the one wreath, as opposed to what he used to do was the Queen's and then the Prince of Wales's. This time he'll be laying one for himself, and I'm sure an equerry will do the same for the Queen Consort.
Yes, I suppose quite likely. And if I can just put in a little bit of a plug, the Duke of Kent, with whom I did a book earlier this year, has recorded a really nice episode of Giles Brandreth's Commonwealth Poetry podcasts, in which he talks about his work with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission.
And the Commonwealth War Graves Commission
is amazing. And so that'll be released on Remembrance Sunday, which is rather appropriate, I think.
Perfect. Well, we'll be watching very keenly.
And on those wreaths, of course, that they lay, you'll have messages, and on those messages will be the ciphers of the new King and Queen Consort.
So Hugo, thank you so much. It's been really great having you, and we've really enjoyed chatting. But as we wrap up your summary of The Crown, it would be negative for sure. But as Lizzie, you would say, look, watch it, have Hugo's notes to one side, and watch it as a drama, knowing that not
watch
all
it
of
as
it
a
is
drama.
true.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I would.
Great stuff.
Say.
Listen, thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening and tuning in again to the Royal Rota podcast. Thank you to Hugo for being here. From Lizzie and from me, we will see you next week.